Have you ever loved someone who kept disappearing right at the moment things started to feel real? Not physically, not always. Sometimes they stay in the room. They still text back, eventually. They still show up to dinner. But something in them steps back the instant the relationship asks for more than they're prepared to give. And you're left standing there, wondering what you did wrong, when the truth is you may not have done anything at all. I want to talk about that pattern today. Not to diagnose anyone and not to hand out a villain and a victim. I want to talk about what's actually happening underneath emotional distance, because once you understand the mechanics of it, a lot of confusing, painful history starts to make a strange kind of sense. Let's start with an idea that might be uncomfortable. Some people don't experience closeness the way you do. For you, intimacy might feel like relief, like exhaling, like finally being able to stop performing and just be known. But for someone else, that exact same closeness can register as danger. Not because they're cruel and not because you're doing something wrong, but because somewhere along the way, their nervous system learned that needing someone is a liability. Think about what that actually means for a relationship. You can't logic your way past a threat response. You can be patient, generous, consistent, endlessly reassuring, and none of it touches the part of them that's sounding an alarm the moment you get close. That's the part people miss. They think the solution to someone's avoidance is more love, more effort, more proof. But you cannot love a nervous system into feeling safe. Safety isn't something you can hand someone. It's something they have to be able to receive. So where does this come from? Nobody is born afraid of intimacy. It's learned, usually early, usually quietly. A kid reaches for comfort and gets silence instead. A kid cries and gets told to toughen up. A kid needs something consistently and discovers, over and over, that the adult they depend on can't reliably provide it. And a child in that situation does something remarkably intelligent. In a survival sense, they adapt. They stop reaching. They lower the volume on their own needs until the needs are barely audible, even to themselves. Need less, and you can't be let down as much. Expect less, and disappointment loses its sting. That strategy works when you're small and dependent on people who won't meet you. It's protective. It's not a character flaw, it's armor built for a specific war. The problem is that the war ends, but the armor doesn't come off automatically. The kid grows up, finds someone warm, someone who actually wants to be close. And you'd think that would feel like healing. Sometimes it does for a while. But as the relationship deepens, the old alarm system doesn't check whether the situation has actually changed, it just fires. Suddenly they're busy. Suddenly they're noticing flaws that didn't bother them a month ago. Suddenly they're not sure this is right. And here's the part that trips people up. In that moment, the avoidant person often believes what they're telling you. It doesn't usually feel like manipulation from the inside. It feels like a legitimate doubt. The mind is very good at producing reasons that make retreat feel rational, especially when retreat is what the body is already demanding. That doesn't mean every person who pulls away is acting in good faith. Some people genuinely do use distance as a tool, and that's a different conversation. But a lot of avoidance isn't calculated at all. It's a rehearsed pattern running on autopilot, completely indifferent to how much you've given or how real your love is. It doesn't know your history. It's just reacting to proximity. Now here's where I think a lot of people go wrong once they learn this. They hear emotional avoidance as a trauma response, and they think, okay, now I understand them, so now my job is to be patient enough, soft enough, understanding enough that they finally feel safe with me. It sounds compassionate. It often isn't. Understanding where someone's pain comes from is not the same thing as agreeing to live inside the consequences of that pain indefinitely. Those are two separate decisions, and conflating them is how people spend years managing someone else's nervous system at the expense of their own. People with avoidant patterns absolutely can grow. They're not permanently unreachable. But growth requires their participation, their own honesty, their own willingness to sit in discomfort instead of fleeing it. Ideally, real support in doing that work. What doesn't produce change is one person endlessly adjusting themselves while the other keeps the pattern comfortably unexamined. You cannot do someone else's healing for them. You can stand near it. You cannot perform it on their behalf. Let's talk about the cycle itself, because if you've lived inside it, you already know its shape. They pull back. You feel it immediately, that specific cold spot where warmth used to be. Anxiety rises. You reach out. You try a little harder, explain yourself a little more, offer a little more reassurance. And then one of two things happens. They stay distant and you spiral, or they come back, and the relief is so intense it almost overwrites the pain that came before it. That relief is powerful. It can feel like proof that this connection is special, when really it might just be your nervous system rewarding you for surviving another round. Then, inevitably, they pull away again. And your brain, having learned that reconnection is a possible outcome, keeps you playing. Somewhere in that loop, people quietly stop living their own lives. Every text becomes a data point. Every silence gets interpreted 6 different ways. Your mood starts tracking theirs. And it happens gradually enough that you don't notice you've handed over the steering wheel until you're already deep into the passenger seat of someone else's ambivalence. So I want to ask you something. If this sounds familiar, what is this relationship doing to your baseline? Not in the good moments. Anyone can feel good in the good moments. What does your average Tuesday feel like? Are you steadier because of this person? Or are you in a permanent, low-grade state of monitoring? Because a relationship isn't supposed to require you to trade your own stability for someone else's comfort. If it does, that's information, not a character flaw on your part. Leaving that pattern rarely feels like freedom at first. It usually feels like loss, even guilt, like you're abandoning someone right when they need patience. But there's a difference between abandonment and self-respect, and it's worth learning to tell them apart. You're allowed to want consistency. You're allowed to want to know where you stand. Wanting reasonable emotional availability from a partner isn't neediness. It's a normal human baseline. Someone who's overwhelmed doesn't have to vanish. They can say, I need space, and I'm still here. That single sentence is the difference between a difficult pattern someone is working on and a difficult pattern someone is hiding behind. I also don't want this to turn into a takedown of avoidant people, because that's not accurate either. Most of them aren't cold on purpose. A lot of them are carrying real loneliness under a very convincing independence, the kind that only becomes visible in a quiet room with no phone, no task, and no one else to focus on. Underneath the defenses, the wants are usually ordinary: to be known, to belong, to matter to someone. The tragedy isn't that they don't want closeness. It's that wanting it and feeling safe enough to let it in aren't the same thing, and the gap between those two can take years to close, if it closes at all. None of that obligates you to wait it out, though. You can hold real compassion for someone's history without volunteering to be the place where that history keeps repeating. So what actually helps practically if you recognize yourself in any of this? Start by noticing the instinct to outgive the distance. When someone pulls back, the impulse is almost always to do more, prove your worth, close the gap, earn your way back to their warmth. But if every withdrawal from them produces more effort from you, you're not solving the pattern, you're feeding it. Their distance becomes the trigger, and your overfunctioning becomes the response. And the two of you settle into a loop that runs itself. So instead of asking, what do I do to bring them closer? Try asking, what is this doing to me while I keep trying? That question puts your attention back where it belongs. Then get specific about what you actually need, not what feels reasonable to ask for, not what would be convenient for them, but what you genuinely require to feel secure. Say it plainly, even just to yourself. Then look honestly at whether the person in front of you is meeting that today, not in some hope for future version of them. Potential isn't a resource you can spend. Only what's actually happening counts. Redirect some of that enormous analytical energy, the kind you've been spending trying to decode their silences, back toward your own life. Friendships, work, physical health, the things that made you feel like yourself before this person existed. This isn't a strategy to make them chase you. It's just true that a person with a full life is less susceptible to being organized entirely around someone else's availability. And notice when explaining yourself has turned into pleading. Healthy communication states a feeling once, maybe twice, clearly. If you find yourself building an increasingly detailed case for why your needs are legitimate, that's worth pausing on. You shouldn't have to argue for the right to have ordinary emotional needs met. If a pattern like this keeps showing up across different relationships, it's worth getting curious rather than self-critical. What does the uncertainty feel like? Is it possible it's being mistaken for chemistry? Sometimes people confuse anxiety for intensity and unpredictability for passion, because a nervous system on high alert can feel a lot like being deeply in love. But steady love tends to feel quieter than that, less like a roller coaster, more like relief. You're not spending your evenings interpreting a two-word text. You're not auditioning for someone's affection. You just know where you stand, and that knowing is its own kind of peace, one that's easy to underestimate until you've actually experienced it. The real shift, I think, happens when the question changes. Not how do I get this person to choose me, but is this relationship actually capable of giving me what I need? That's not a colder question, it's a more honest one. And it tends to change everything that follows, because it puts you back in the position of evaluating instead of auditioning. You can still care about someone with an avoidant pattern. You can still understand where it came from, hold compassion for it, even hope they eventually do the work to move through it. None of that requires you to stay somewhere that consistently costs you your own stability while you wait. Loving someone and abandoning yourself for them are not the same act, even though they can feel identical from the inside. Especially if you've spent a long time not being sure of the difference somewhere along the way, the goal quietly shifts from proving you're worth staying for to noticing whether you're being met at all. That's not cynicism. It's just what it looks like to finally take your own needs as seriously as you've been taking theirs.